I sat quietly in my living room, the dim light of the evening casting long shadows across the walls. The phone in my hand felt heavy, though it hadn't rung in hours. I had blocked my children, both of them, and the silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the kind that reverberates with unresolved pain and unanswered questions. As I stared at the screen, memories of our fractured family flashed before me, each one sharper than the last. 8 years ago, my life as I knew it crumbled. I was 56, and Michael, my husband, was 52. He had been having an affair with a woman he knew from university. When I discovered the truth, the betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just the affair. It was the realization that our marriage had been deteriorating for years. Michael had often complained about my career as a high school softball coach. The long hours and low pay were never enough for him. Despite my efforts to make things work, his dissatisfaction was a constant reminder that I wasn't enough in his eyes. The day I left the house was the day I chose myself. Our children, Chris and Jenny, were already adults and independent, so staying in a loveless marriage felt unnecessary. But the divorce brought with it a tidal wave of consequences I hadn't anticipated. Chris and Jenny sided with Michael almost immediately. They painted his affair as a symptom of his boredom with me, something they seemed to accept as natural. Their betrayal was a wound almost as deep as Michael's infidelity. In the months following the divorce, I tried to rebuild my life. Loneliness became my constant companion, and the absence of my children was a void I couldn't fill. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Michael remarried his affair partner. The news was a dagger to the heart, and the fact that my children embraced his new wife only twisted it further. I reached out to them repeatedly, hoping to mend our relationship, but their responses were lukewarm at best. Invitations to milestone events like their weddings never came, and I was left to piece together their lives through social media posts and secondhand updates from distant relatives. Over the years, I poured my energy into a new venture. With 2 close friends, I started a business centered around mentoring young athletes. It was a leap of faith born from financial necessity and a shared passion for coaching. The early days were grueling, filled with long hours and uncertainty. But slowly, the business grew. Our facility gained a reputation in the community, and success began to feel within reach. By the time our efforts bore fruit, I was no longer the struggling coach Michael had belittled. I was a successful businesswoman. Then, earlier this year, my children reached out to me after years of near silence. At first, I was overjoyed. Their sudden interest felt like the olive branch I had longed for. Chris and Jenny visited me, bringing stories of their lives and, for the first time, expressing interest in mine. They spoke about their children, my grandchildren, and how they wanted me to be a part of their lives. The idea of finally meeting them filled me with a bittersweet hope. But as our conversations unfolded, cracks in their motives began to show. They spoke about financial struggles, their father's remarriage, and their stepmother's plans to sell the family business. It became clear they weren't reaching out purely out of love or regret. They needed help, my help. The realization was like ice water poured over my fragile optimism. Was this sudden reconciliation genuine, or was it a calculated move to secure financial support? Despite my suspicions, I decided to hear them out. Chris and Jenny spoke passionately about their dreams and their desire to start a new business. They claimed they wanted me involved, not just financially, but as a grandmother to their children. But the sincerity of their words was overshadowed by the years of neglect and rejection I had endured. Why now? Why, after all this time? The turning point came when they showed up unannounced at my workplace, bringing their children along. I was in the middle of a training session and couldn't meet them immediately. As they waited in the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that their actions were more about appearances than genuine connection. When I finally met them, their pleas for reconciliation were accompanied by subtle hints about their financial struggles. The weight of their expectations pressed heavily on me, and for the first time, I felt the strength to push back. I told them I needed time to think. Blocking their contacts felt drastic but necessary. I needed space to untangle my emotions and assess the situation without their influence. The days that followed were filled with reflection and conversations with trusted friends and colleagues. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, but none could truly understand the depth of my inner conflict. 2 weeks later, Chris and Jenny returned, this time more desperate. They admitted their stepmother's company was failing and that her decision to sell would leave them jobless. They confessed they had sided with Michael during the divorce out of convenience, not conviction. Their honesty was a small consolation, but it didn't erase the years of pain they had caused. They asked for an investment in their new business, framing it as an opportunity to rebuild our relationship and create a better future for their children. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to see this as a chance to reconnect and heal. But a part of me couldn't ignore the possibility that I was being used. The idea of investing in their venture felt risky, not just financially, but emotionally. I had built my life from the ground up after losing everything, and the thought of jeopardizing my hard-earned stability was daunting. Ultimately, I decided to compromise. I invited them to dinner at my house, making it clear that financial support was off the table. The evening was tense but cordial. For the first time, I met my grandchildren. They were beautiful, innocent reminders of the family I had longed for. The sight of them filled me with a mix of joy and sorrow. I couldn't help but wonder what our relationship might have been if circumstances had been different. At the end of the night, Chris and Jenny apologized for their actions, acknowledging the hurt they had caused. It was a small step toward reconciliation, but the road ahead remained uncertain. I told them I needed time to rebuild trust, and that any relationship we had would have to be on equal footing. They seemed to understand, though the disappointment in their eyes was hard to ignore. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting more and more on the fragility of our family bonds. I realized that while trust is hard to rebuild, it is not impossible. I decided to observe their actions rather than their words. It wasn't enough for them to say they wanted a relationship. They needed to show it. In the following weeks, Chris and Jenny made small but significant efforts. They began reaching out without ulterior motives, sharing updates about their lives and their children. They even invited me to their homes for casual visits, a gesture I cautiously accepted. One afternoon, as I sat with my grandchildren in Chris's living room, I felt a glimmer of hope. They were full of energy and curiosity, and their laughter filled the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Watching them play, I wondered if perhaps this was the fresh start I had been yearning for. But even in those moments of joy, a part of me remained guarded. The wounds of the past were not so easily forgotten. As the weeks turned into months, the dynamics between us began to shift. Chris and Jenny's actions spoke louder than their apologies ever could. They stopped asking for financial support and instead focused on rebuilding our relationship. They invited me to school events, birthday parties, and family dinners. Slowly, my role as a grandmother began to take shape. It was a role I embraced cautiously but wholeheartedly. Despite the progress, I couldn't ignore the lingering doubts that crept in during quiet moments. What if this newfound connection was temporary? What if, once their lives stabilized, they drifted away again? These fears were my constant companions, but I reminded myself that relationships are built on moments, not guarantees. If I wanted a future with my family, I had to take the risk of trusting them again. One evening, Jenny called me unexpectedly. Her voice was filled with emotion as she recounted a recent argument with Michael and his wife. She admitted that she had been blind to the pain I endured during the divorce and that her loyalty to her father was, in part, driven by fear of losing stability. Her honesty caught me off guard, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection with her. It was a conversation that marked a turning point for us. In the months that followed, our relationship continued to grow. Chris and Jenny worked hard to show me that they valued me not just as a grandmother, but as their mother. They involved me in their lives in ways I never thought possible, and slowly, my guarded heart began to open. The pain of the past didn't disappear, but it became a part of our story rather than the defining chapter. Now, as I sit in my living room once more, the shadows of the past feel less oppressive. The phone in my hand no longer feels heavy, and the silence around me is no longer deafening. It is the silence of a life in progress, filled with the promise of new beginnings. My journey with Chris and Jenny is far from over, but for the first time in years, I feel hope. Hope that we can build something beautiful from the ashes of our fractured past. Trust, I've learned, is not given. It is earned. And while the road to reconciliation is long and winding, it is a road I am willing to walk. For my grandchildren, and most importantly,